Do 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 do. Welcome to Making Luck, a Dominion podcast. A Dominion podcast.
It's a mini
I'm
podcast.
I'm Wandering Winder. Joining me on the line as always is my splendiferful co-host, Adam Horton. Adam, what's going
Hey,
on, man?
hey, what's up? I gotta tell you, splendiferful. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me all day.
That's a little bit sad.
I got
Uh,
up and started recording this with you.
oh, so you're saying you've only talked to me today.
It's the
Great.
nicest thing
Uh,
you've said to me all day.
I can believe that. I can
Yeah,
believe that.
yeah.
Um, so last time we left you with a kingdom that we discussed and we took your feedback on. Adam, you want to read the kingdom to our listeners and video listeners?
Yeah, sure. We've got soothsayer, mountebank, ill-gotten gains, contraband, city, cache, silk road, quarry, procession, cut purse, and we have shelters this game. No colonies, but shelters. For our audio-only listeners, we'll do that one more time. Soothsayer, mountebank, ig, contraband, city, cache, silk road, quarry, procession, cut purse. And we have shelters, no colonies.
And if you remember, I think we were talking about pretty similar strategies. I was saying that I wanted to open, we both wanted to open Silver Cut Purse, and then I wanted to go for Soothsayer, and Adam wanted to go for Mountebank, um, possibly supplementing for Ill-Gotten Gains at some points. And then I was, I think, a little bit more on early greening than you were. Uh,
Yeah, I had said get a mountebank first, and then pick up a second soothsayer as your second
right. Yeah.
cursor.
Yeah. As your second cursor. Yep. Yes. And I said that I thought Quarry wasn't the craziest thing ever, but was definitely bad, especially in comparison to Cuppers. I also brought up Contraband, which you thought was crazy. And I think neither of us really liked City very much, and we didn't really discuss like Cash.
Well, I think contraband's probably better than cash on this board in pretty much every case, yeah?
I think so, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, contraband and Silk Road have a pretty good synergy.
Yeah, Cash also kind of though,
It's true, but
possibly.
I feel like contraband synergy with that plus buy is a much bigger deal than cash's synergy.
Yeah, well, the options and then the plus buy, right?
Yeah,
Because the Silk Road helps Contraband because it gives you options. If they deny province, I can get two Silk Roads or a Silk Road and a Duchy. Or if they deny Duchy, then I can get Silk Road. And if they deny Silk Road, then I can get Duchy.
you can get two estates at the very worst, which is like not the worst thing ever.
Sometimes better because you need to up your Silk Roads,
For
but
sure, yeah.
that's kind of an edgy case. So we played some games. Adam, you want to talk about how that went?
Yeah, I lost like a million games to Wandering Winder. It was so good.
And you won like 500,000 games.
Mm, that's being a little generous. I probably won like three or four.
You definitely won more than that. Like I tried some wacky offbeat things that I didn't think were good towards the end that you were winning all of them. Uh,
Eh,
although it is also important to note, I think here, 5-2 is really, really, really good.
yeah, and I think
First player is really good.
yeah, I would have put two reallys there. Yeah.
Um, and being able to knock your opponent, to like getting your five a turn or a shuffle faster than your opponent, um,
It's like GG.
one way or another, like with the cut purse often, is really, really good. It's not entirely GG because if the cursor misses the shuffle, then you're fine. But like
Sure, like if you open five
being
two,
being a
get a Mountie,
whole
and
like shuffle play of a cursor up is a very, very big factor. At least early on, like later on, it's not the worst thing ever. Like a 6-4 curse split isn't totally unovercomable,
yeah,
but you need to be getting something in return for it and not just like, oh, well, I just didn't do anything because it missed. You to be like, well, I got fewer plays, but I got more golds or something. Or gold's probably not, but like, I have like three extra silvers and you were able to play your soothsayer an extra time. It's like, okay, That's not the worst thing in the world.
Not there are worse things in the world.
So conclusions, Adam.
I entered this game thinking one mountebank before Soothsayer was good,
Yeah.
and I was shot down pretty hard. I think the only way mountebank is good at all on this board is if you get a 5-2, in which case it's way better. Like opening mountebank is
I
a big
don't
deal.
know if it's way better, but I think it's probably a little better on
I
turn.
I'm gonna say way better,
Okay.
like by a lot, because it gives you $2. You can just buy another fiver. Like it's a huge deal.
Yeah, although I think the one game that it came up, you still won fine that you got the Soothsayer instead of the Mountebank.
I it was
I,
close and it shouldn't have been.
I agree with you. I think the $2 right then when your economy isn't up so much. Also, like giving the curse early on or the copper early on is yeah, it's probably not that big a deal because your deck like copper's close to an average card. But
Yeah, and like not drawing them a card and helping them hit 5 in some cases. Like
sure,
I think
yeah, no, I agree. Turn one or
it's
two, I would go Mountebank.
and I think it's not close. Like everything points towards mountebank there. But I think after that, like Soothsayer's just super better, and like the more I played the game, the more I realized it was because like
Gold
you
is a
know
really good card.
gold is really good and copper is not really that bad.
Yeah.
So
And I think part of the important thing there was like rushing down green fairly aggressively without necessarily trying to empty the provinces is, despite the shelters, still good.
and I'm not really sold on that one. Like yeah, you won a lot of the games, and yeah, you were doing that more than me, and I'm still not sold.
Okay. I mean not it's still a little bit tricky, but I think you want to go fairly like I think you don't want to bank on provinces being like a big majority of your points. I think you want it to be either either that there's some you definitely want to get some provinces. You don't want to just be like I'm gonna go for only duchies and silk roads. Like you want 1 to 3 provinces probably. I mean, obviously if you can get more. But I'm gonna say I think you're generally the speed you're greening, you're kind of anticipating getting 1 to 3 provinces and then a lot of duchies and a lot of silk roads.
I just feel like the person who got more provinces won the game when there was a difference. I think 100% of the time when we played. And like
I'm
if you go too hard,
not sure that that's true. I'd have to go look. Um, I
okay,
think definitely getting like a lot more provinces. Like if you get 2 more provinces than the other person, you're almost certainly going to win. If it's a difference of one, but the other thing is like we were tying on number of provinces a lot, and then going for more green, more of the cheaper green was winning me the game.
okay, but what's to say that that means that it was right? Maybe I got unlucky and I didn't get more provinces even though I built more. Like, I mean, I probably didn't build
Well,
more optimally, but
it's that's certainly possible. I think you on expectation would get more provinces building more, but I don't think you get that many more for the amount that you're for the amount of work you're putting into building. I don't think the it ups the expectation in provinces all that much.
sure. And
It's
so
really hard to budge that much.
yeah, and so like for certain draws, then you don't build that much more.
I do think it's somewhat draw dependent on how much you hit. But I was also a bigger fan of getting ill-gotten gains over gold, whereas you would sometimes do that, but early enough. If it was early enough, you'd get gold instead.
Yeah, I don't think you do it 100% of the time, but I think that there's a good amount of the time where you want to get gold over Ig.
I think you usually want. So my typical was that I would get 2 soothsayers and then more or less ill-gotten gains almost every time um, until the curses were gone. Um,
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that can be right, but I certainly don't think it's always right.
I think it's right over 90% of the time.
I'm putting it like 70 to 80%, man.
Okay. Anyway, 70 to 80%, man.
Yeah, let's argue about
That's
percentages. It's fun.
70,
People like to
70
hear
to
that.
80%, man. That's my superhero name. What in the world? It's 70 to 80%, man. Anyway,
So good.
um, okay. Other things that we tried out, based on some listener suggestions, and we loved all the suggestions. We tried out straight rushing ill-gotten gains, which won a game, but that was because it was like it got like an 8-2 curse split win,
It
uh,
was pretty ridiculous. I
which is
mean,
not a normal thing.
yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for, oh, well, I gave him purple, so he couldn't hit 5, and, like, the cursor got delayed and couldn't get any eggs to even it out, and, like,
Sure,
that happens
I don't think
sometimes.
that strategy is horrible, but I don't think it's very good. Um,
You got to get
and
lucky to pull that off,
we
you know?
tried a little bit of a modification where we got one cursor first. Uh, Soothsayer, I think, makes a lot more sense if you're ill-gotten gains rushing, especially because, like, if I'm ig rushing, then my mountebank's probably not going to give that many curses anyway.
Yeah,
Like, it'll give one or two, maybe three if I'm really lucky.
yeah.
Um,
And I think
and
I
that's a
think that
lot closer.
yeah, and I think that's good sometimes. I think if you have certain draws
Yeah.
where like you get an early province or something that you don't
Right.
want to turn down, like that could
Yeah.
definitely be very good.
Yeah, I ended up doing that just normally in one game because it was like by the time I hit 5 to 7 the second time, there were only like two curses left, and I'm like, at this point, I think Egg is better than getting a second soothsayer that's never going to give a curse.
Yeah, and I that happened to me once, but that was also the game where I floundered around and lost to just Ig because of
Well,
terrible things
yeah,
happened to me.
that was it took you forever to hit 5. Yeah.
Yeah, by the second time I hit 5, there were like two curses
Whereas
left.
the one I was talking about, I was hitting like I spiked a province instead, and
Yeah.
so that's yeah. So I think it's a bit draw dependent on whether you get the second cursor. Soothsayer I think is better because the gold is good because you have to play these long drawn out games. The other thing I'll say about what we were discussing about the 90% versus 70 to 80% on like yeah, but like how aggressively you green is like you even not greening aggressively, it's not like you were like I'm just going to eschew these cheaper things almost entirely and just try to get like a lot of provinces. Like you were still buying a decent number of duchies and silk roads,
Yeah,
just
it
late.
was it never felt very good to start going for duchies, and I did go for them a little earlier than normal,
Hmm.
but like I almost always ended up doing it
See,
because like
I think the thing, if you want to say going for more economy is better, either there's one of two things. One is that you're saying I'm greening a little bit too early, in which case, okay, fine. But the other is like if you're saying no, you really want to focus down the provinces, is you shouldn't really touch the other green almost at all, I think.
yeah, and I don't think focusing on provinces here is going to get you very
But
far.
I think
There's
I was
too
gonna
many
say I think
points
in that
otherwise.
case, even if you do win by like are up by a couple provinces, like you win the province split 5-3 or 6-2,
Six
I
two,
guess. Even like I think it's going to take way too long to get the 6,
yeah.
and I'll have just tons of duchies and silk roads.
Yeah, like
Uh,
there's that comparison where you're thinking about do I get duchy or gold? And
I
like
I think
sometimes there's one comparison which I don't think applies very much, but applies in this game,
yeah,
where you say how many times are you going to see that card? If you're going to
right.
see the card only once, then you should get the duchy because then instead of
Usually,
getting the province,
occasionally it's still right to get the gold just because like
right? And this
you're
is this
gonna
is a
if the game is about to end and you need to close out on provinces before they catch up.
sure, and that's why this is a bad rule almost all of the time, right? But I think it's good here because this
Yeah,
game is not ending on provinces.
right. The other thing that we tried was cities. I couldn't get cities to be good in almost any situation. It randomly kind of came up once that you were like at the bottom of a shuffle and two piles were empty and you didn't
Yeah,
really want a
duchies were
duchy yet,
gone.
and it
Duchies were
seemed
gone.
better than contraband.
Yeah, like duchies were gone. Silk roads were low, and I needed to hit like a province to win. I was in this situation where I needed to hit a province to win. I was about to shuffle, and I'm like, well, I can't really get a silk road here. I need to buy something that helps me hit province, and contraband was not it because like you could deny the province that way.
But there were one or two times where I went like pretty aggressively for cities, and it was pretty awful.
Yeah, like I had bad draws and I still won comfortably.
Yeah,
Going
like
against them.
I got they were activated, singly activated pretty fast, but like I'm drawing two, and I have five or six, and sometimes I wouldn't even have five because my deck was so bad because it was like all cities and coppers and curses.
Yeah. You had
Um,
like a couple of scary turns one time, but
and then, well, yeah, eventually I got to where they were doubly activated. Like
and you were
every,
hitting like province and
I was
estate.
getting province most turns, but like I was just so far behind.
Yeah, the
And
game was over.
no, I think it's important to note actually you changed the strategy a little bit. That you
Yeah,
focused down Silk Roads
yeah,
instead of if I can get Duchy. If I can't get Silk Road.
right,
Uh,
right.
and I think that was actually pretty important because if with a little more time I might have been able to come back.
Yeah, you did have four cut purses, so I was, making sure that I could buy a
Right.
pile card every turn
Right.
just to end
Well,
the
and
game
I
faster.
think if I was going for cities like that, going for the cut first is the only way that like almost makes any sense at all.
Hmm.
It's like, well, if I want to use the actions and I need to slow you down,
Yeah.
but I just it's hard to imagine that it's worth it
Hmm.
almost ever. Um, I think last thing I want to say about this kingdom is um, if it wasn't shelters, if it was estates instead, I would think you'd really want to green pretty aggressively because those Silk Roads were like I was getting them to be usually worth three, and it wasn't particularly rare to get them to be worth four. Um, but they would be very much worth four most of the time if I had two extra green cards.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, and really the only exception is, the hovel, right? Like I would get an early duchy or Silk Road with a hovel in hand, but I mean, then that's
Yeah,
not going to happen with estates. But yeah, other than that,
yeah, and I still think that it was important to go ig over duchy, even if it's trashing a hovel. Like
oh, for
if it's
sure.
assuming it's giving a curse, obviously.
Yeah, like that thought never really enters my brain until the curses are gone.
Right. Okay, so
Oh, I had
that's
I had one more thing.
sure.
I had a comment on the YouTube for last one. This is some feedback back that we did not play test. Uh, we had one person say that their lunch group of 5 people played the
Oh,
kingdom.
yeah.
Yeah, we didn't do that. Partially because we didn't want to find 3 more people, but like honestly, this kingdom with more than 2 players sounds like a completely miserable experience that I
Well,
would
yeah,
not
and
recommend.
if I remember right, they said this kingdom is completely miserable. There are a couple of other people like there's so many attacks. This kingdom is miserable. Like, um, yeah, if it's miserable for you, then don't play this kind of game. Like, I like this kind of game, and it's not miserable to me. Uh, it's probably more miserable if you're playing in paper. Uh,
Yeah, I might skip this one IRL sometimes, depending. I don't know. I mean, I kind of like the fact that these come up every once in a while because it's not that often. So it's a nice change of pace. It tests different skills than engine building and that kind of thing.
but yeah, it's there's something that I think people like a lot is they like to be doing a million super powerful things every turn, whereas like, I'm buying 8 provinces or 3 provinces or whatever. And like I like that too, but I like other things also. And like I like having this more measured game sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. And I think
But
it's probably a good time to like state this blanket reminder that I think we touched on in the first episode that
yeah,
like all of our commentary is going to be pretty much exclusive to 2 player games.
yeah,
And there are a lot of things different about 3 player games, and I think that
for sure.
we'll have maybe 1 or 2 episodes at some point to
Yeah, we
talk
may
about
have the
this.
occasional episode on more players. Probably not more than four ever.
Yeah, but like I don't feel like I can speak as authoritatively on these kind of things as I
For
can
sure.
when it comes to just 2 players, and so that's most of the reason it is that way. Not because I think it's worse, because I think there's a lot of fun to be had playing 3 player Dominion,
Oh, for sure.
but I'm not nearly as good at it, and I don't want to be
I'm not
saying
as good at
things.
it. I also think it's harder to competitively because you get some other issues of things that
There,
arise.
yeah, there are. It can get a little political, even indirectly political, but it does happen.
Right, but like how much is second place worth to me versus first place versus
Mm,
third place, or anyway.
right.
Um, yeah, so that does it for the Kingdom from last week.
Yep.
And I guess the last note on things like that, do whatever is fun for you and your play group. Like, if you
It's
guys
true.
all like something, do it that way. Like, the rules actually don't say that full random is the thing. I had this come up in a comment once, and it's like, the rules say you get to choose however you want.
Yeah. It's
If
like,
you think something's going to be more fun, as long as it's more fun, it is like everyone in the group agrees, go with it.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I skip over lots of games playing IRL because like for a variety of reasons. If there's a newer player, I'm not gonna give them reserve
King's
cards and
Court
duration
Goons
cards in the first.
Masquerade.
What?
King's Court Goons Masquerade.
Well, you know what? If that comes up, I'm never turning that down because
First game, I'm going to pin you.
I'm not okay. The first like three kingdoms I give new players are very measured and pretty much predetermined.
Pre-con, yeah.
So like if I'm going into full random, yes, there's a risk of that. And if I see the pin, like I've played like 4,000 games or so, and except for Design Kingdoms, it's never happened. Like I want
Oh
to do.
man, I've had it come up like 3 or 4 times.
I've
Random.
had two cut purse pins in full random, but never Goons Kingsport Goons Masquerade.
Okay, not that exact three, but I've had the King's Court Masquerade X come up a few times. I think I've had the Goons one once, maybe, but I
Oh
had
yeah.
Post come up. Uh,
Hmm.
that was
Minion.
anyway. We'll talk about pins on another episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also,
So
needles. Needles could be a topic.
it could be. Yeah. That's that's skewer. That's the chest. Anyway, so
Well, skewer is a chess term. Pin is also a chess term. Fork is a chess term.
yeah,
Uh,
we need to
there's
find
several
Dominion
versions.
analogs for all of these.
Fork?
Yeah. There's like a fork in the road, like a crossroads. Never mind.
Crossroads? What?
Yeah,
I love it.
crossroads. I'm calling it fork now.
Okay.
And I mean, fork isn't really good for eating Virginia brand ham, which is the.
Are you kidding? Fork is great for eating Virginia brand ham. It's just not as good as fingers.
I'm gonna disagree with you on that. I think
Or especially bread.
which we are just finishing the bread
Yes.
portion of our podcast sandwich.
Segue.
Yeah, that was pretty good, don't you think?
We have great segues.
So good.
Also, it helps to point out that they're segues.
That's right.
It's
So anyway, yeah, let's main topic for this podcast. Yeah, let's take a look at that. So what do we got? We got attacks, sea hag, goons. Okay, we're not trashing. Oh, wait a second. That's. Oh, okay. So the main portion of this podcast is the way we look at games of Dominion. Yeah.
we analyze a board and try to plan out a strategy and what we want to do for the game.
Yeah. There's
So like right at the beginning, what's going through our brain?
which is ironic because this is not at the beginning of the podcast.
It's the beginning of the Virginia brand ham hashtag Virginia brand ham meat delicious portion of the podcast.
Hashtag Virginia brand ham meat. Anyway,
It's a
it's
meat product.
it totally is. So a lot of times, a lot of decisions in a game of Dominion should be made before you take your first turn, and it's not uncommon for people to sit and stare at the board for a while and think about what they're going to do. Some people believe that you get online and before your client has loaded, the opponent has already purchased their first card, and like you feel a little bit better knowing that you're probably going to beat them, right? Um, I mean, some people's computers load slowly, and some people think faster than others. But if you've ever watched one of my videos before, like I go through this entire process out loud at the beginning of every video, and I think it's worth it because I play better because of it. And a lot of I have a method to it, but going into a little more detail about like what I'm looking for and how much I actually do decide before I take my first turn, as opposed to decisions that I make in the moment when I have more information in the middle of the game. There's a lot of value in that, and I think maybe we want to talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to, something I want to bring up at this point is that it's not that you're planning the whole game before it starts, right?
Yeah.
It's this is the kind of thing I want to do. This is what I think my opponent might also be doing and how these are the things I need to keep in mind to be able to react to, I need to watch for them doing these kinds of things. Here's my general game plan, but I need to be able to react this way, so I need to pay attention to X, Y, and Z, whatever's important. It's identifying what the important things are, right?
Yeah. I think that um, a focused deck will usually beat a similar deck that's not focused. And so if you start the focus from the beginning of the game, you're going to have an advantage in that, right? At the same time, if you refuse to change your plan and the plan needs changed, uh, you might lose that way too. And I think that especially applies in games with more than two players. Um, which I mean, a lot of them I do play competitively in real life, and so if you see lots of things that can happen, if you see getting contested on a strategy can have a big impact, then generically, and this is such a difficult topic to talk about that I don't want to go too much into it because it's hard to talk about, but like just getting thin and having options from that point can be very valuable so you can react appropriately to what your opponents are doing. So
Right.
you can give up a little pace that way to get some more flexibility. But like, I don't think that applies that much in two-player games. Yeah.
And that's something though that you might think about at the beginning of the game. You might think, I need to be able to get to this point, so I will have these options and react at that point, right? But that's also some boards you don't want to do that at all. It's you really need to go hard for a particular combo or something, and you don't want to thin down and get options because that's just weaker and too slow. The flexibility is too much of a power hit, right?
For sure,
So,
and the biggest example of that is like a key split, like the village split or something.
or if it's like Ironworks Gardens Rush, like
Oh, yeah,
you can't always take the time to like I'm gonna trash with my foragers because it's awful, right?
seems pretty bad. Yeah. So so yeah, I guess I'm gonna start going down my list. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the first thing I look at, and there's sort of chunks, and I guess there are like four chunks, and I don't necessarily compartmentalize them like this, but this is it's important I think in my mind to do them in this order because um, the earlier ones kind of shape the way you think about the later ones. So the first chunk is I look for attacks, and I look for defense against those attacks, and I look for trashing. And the reason I do it like this, attacks are important because if there's a good attack out there, you can assume that a competent opponent will be trying to play that attack on you as much as feasible, right? So like if there's a cursor out there and it's like expect to get curses in your deck and deal with that, right? If there's a hand size reducer out there, you should expect that you're going to be starting your turns with 3 cards in your hand. I mean, there are a few attacks that aren't that great, like Spy and Fortune Teller. You can pretty much safely ignore, and there's a couple of other ones you can ignore most of the time, a little more, a little less often than those two. But like, just knowing that that's going to happen to you, it sort of frames your mind like, okay, well, if I really wanted 5 cards in my hand for this other thing to work, then I don't get too invested in it. And along the same vein, like a lot of these more significant attacks you have to play around more are the junking attacks. And so I look for trashing at this time to try and get an idea of how much control I'm going to have over the size of my deck. If I can't have control over the size of my deck, if there's only Moneylender and a cursing attack out, then I'm going to have to deal with junks in my life that I need to either draw or find some way to get around. And so providing those junks to my opponent as well as having some way, if any, to deal with them myself, that's a focal point of the game, and a focal point especially at the beginning of the game where the decisions I'm making now are, the most magnified because the game hasn't started yet. So that's a big deal, and it kind of shapes like if I'm going to have tight control over what's in my deck, I can get a little more ambitious when I'm looking at the other things that are possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so the second chunk is I look for
Um,
the bread and
so
yes,
so hold on a sec.
yes.
I wanted to say with the attacks and defense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's easy sometimes to think, you know, there's an attack which might be good in the abstract, but on this board there's some good defense to it, right? And so
Sure.
I'm not going to go for that attack because this defense is good enough that if I go for the attack and they go for the defense, then I'm going to be behind them, right?
Okay.
Speaking very abstractly, right?
That's a reason to not open with the attack.
Right. And this is my point. My point is it's very easy to then like they don't go
Pretend
for
it
the
doesn't
defense.
exist. Yeah.
You need to be able to pivot back and go. So this is something you need to keep in mind is it really just that the attack is weak enough, or is it that and here's where the flexibility can come in, right? Is
Oh
that
yeah.
when I'm planning from the beginning, it's okay, I'm not going to go for this attack because the defense is good enough. So you probably are going for the defense. If they don't go for the defense, you need to be able to pivot back around to the attack. And if that's not going to be reliable, you need to rethink what you're doing. Because usually a defense, like if it's like a lighthouse or trader or something, is a bit of a concession. Like if I open lighthouse instead of silver, I'm down a little bit, right?
In
Most of the
some cases.
most of the time.
Yeah.
Um, because just lighthouse's one money spread out over 2 turns tends to be worse. Tends to, not always.
Like ever so slightly worse
Yeah, it's
sometimes.
like 5 or 10% worse, but like it's a real amount worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to justify that by if they go for silvers instead, you need to be able to turn around and attack them. And if you can't do that, then you shouldn't be going for the defense to start with.
For sure, yeah, that makes sense. I think the biggest example of that is Young Witch. I think that comes up the most in Young Witch games.
Young Witch and Bane is a huge example, and it's very tricky and intricate because you always have to be going back and forth about how much defense do I have versus how much defense do they have? Is this
Yeah,
good enough for me to get the Young Witch? And then also the opportunity cost, right?
yeah,
Is this is always a factor, right? Well, the attack is good, but if what I'm giving up is really great or is fairly awful, that's going to make a difference on where that kind of balance point is.
hmm for sure. Yeah, Young Witch is such a cool card. I mean, like we'll probably, I don't know, it's tough to do an episode on it, but it deserves one.
Yeah, yeah. At some point we probably will, but it's a lot of it's going to be here's what
Depends.
you look for in the Bane and the rest of the board, and like it's
Yeah.
very complicated.
Oh yeah, such a good card though.
So good.
Yeah. So after that first chunk, I have a pretty good idea of the amount of control I'm going to have over what's in my deck. The next chunk of things I look for are the components of building an engine. I want to figure out how good an engine is going to be if it's possible to build, how strong, that kind of thing. So the three things I look for are villages, anything that allows you to play more than one terminal action in a turn. I consider a village. So, Prince and Throne Room, they fit there because you can play more than one terminal in a turn sometimes. Um, if you don't have a village, you're now restricted again. You have to play one terminal per turn, decide what it's going to be, decide if you're happy with that, etc. Draw is anything that increases the size of your hand. And, there are some exceptions, like Apothecary and Counting House are restricted on their draw. They can only draw coppers.
That's
For
a that's a yes. There's a big difference between those though.
Yeah, so like you have to find some way to convert that into other cards, like pair it with Cellar or Warehouse or something.
Right.
So like if you can do that, then yes, that's a
Then
giant
that
pain.
turns it into quote unquote real draw, or sometimes like secret chamber effect if what you need is
More
well
money.
coppers are money anyway, so
Yeah.
that doesn't really help you. But if you can, sometimes there's just the raw number of cards can be used for your advantage. Artificer, for example, right?
Yeah.
Is in that case, maybe I'm not drawing more other cards, but I don't need to because I can just use that I have a lot of cards to be my payload.
Hmm. Yeah, it, it you have to figure out how you can convert those cards into drawing better cards from your
Right.
deck as opposed
Right.
to just being coppers, and then like how reliable it's going to be, and blah blah blah. So like you think through the process of how to increase your hand size with cards that are whatever you put in your deck. Yeah. And then finally there's plus buy, and that's not just plus buy, it's gainers, but it's
It
more
can be
about.
gainers sometimes, though. It's important to look at what type exactly, right?
For sure, and the way I really frame it is, what are my amazing turns going to look like? Yeah, I can draw and play a bunch of cards, but can I only get one province at the end of that? Or is it like, well, I butcher some stuff into provinces, or I I gain a bunch of stuff and then buy one vineyard? Or if those turns, when I'm done with my amazing turns from villages and draw, are not amazing enough to justify how much of a pain I had to go to actually get the turn, then that speaks to the strength of whatever engine I'm going to build. And so like I'm looking here for engines, for reasons to not go for an engine more than I am looking for a reason to go for an engine, because like engines are amazing. I want to go for it anyway. So I have to try and convince myself, okay, well, I guess an engine not really possible. Well, I've got all these curses I need to draw, and the draw's kind of weak. I have Shanty Town and I've got Rabble. Oh, that's gross. Or like Squire and Smithy, or maybe Village and Moat, like weaker draw combinations like that, as opposed to something more explosive like City Council Room, or something bigger.
City Council room can be very explosive.
Yeah, you can draw a ton of cards. It's like a billion cards you can draw.
It's kind of like baking soda and vinegar.
Yeah, it's not unlike baking soda and vinegar.
It's an explosive combination.
It's so explosive, bro. But like when I'm looking at these first two chunks, I'm just trying to figure out what's the landscape of the game going to be like in terms of my potential to do amazing things on my turn. If my
Hmm.
turns can never get that amazing, then there's not much point in building up. So at this point, I kind of have to weigh the engine options versus just going for money or some other strategy that's not playing a ton of action cards every turn and requiring a bunch of build up to do.
Yeah.
So the third chunk is kind of a less significant chunk. I look for, usually this kind of thing just jumps out at me because there are very few of them, but I look for combos. I look for stuff like Hermit Market Square. They're usually next to each other. Traveling for a counting house or Native Village Bridge, or something. Just huge factors that are gonna affect.
Ironworks Gardens.
Yeah, stuff like that. And even, going down to big synergies like Stonemason and Quarry or Apprentice Rats or something like that. I mean, a lot of times I'll see these things when I'm looking over the other stuff.
Apprentice Market Square.
Oh yeah, Apprentice Market, it's a big deal. So, but if I didn't see them, you don't want to lose a game because you missed something big. And so these kind of combos that really shape the course of the game, like everything sort of revolves around them because they're so powerful. And now you're just looking for support. That's something you want to look for. And also in the same vein, you want to look for things that enable big money in a similar way. So if I'm looking at gear, wharf, treasure trove, big money, that's a big deal. Big money becomes really good on that board. Same thing with slog enablers, so
Did
stuff
you
like
say
bureaucrat.
Gear, Wharf, like all three of those?
Well, I mean, all three of them together still pretty good, uh, but any of
I
them by themselves is going
I
to
don't
be
know
pretty
that
good.
Wharf is like a big money. Like it's a really good big money deck, but I don't know that I would consider it an enabler.
Well, I mean, Wharf is around, so an engine's going to be great too. But you
Just to
just
say, because it's usually better in an engine, right?
yeah, I mean, gear and Wharf are good in engines too. But you have to think about, what if someone plays big money? Can that beat what I'm doing? That's
Sure,
that's usually something that's responsible to check if you're not feeling that great about your engine for whatever reason.
sure.
And the same thing for slogs. There's a couple of slog enablers out there, like junking attacks are good enablers for slogs, or something like bureaucrat, or cash, or contraband, Silk Road, or I just have those on the brain right now. But like, if there's a really great slog here, or Fillstone,
Force
then
traders.
Horse Trader's pretty good, yeah. You just have to think about what you're playing against. In a two-player game, you want to go for the best strategy. If it's mirrored, it's not that good, but it's mirrored, which means it's still worth going for if it's the best thing. So when I'm thinking about things at this point, I'm thinking about them uncontested or against a different strategy like big money.
Hmm.
So and that's kind of key in two-player games, and it does change in higher player games. There's more to take into account. But these are things that I look for, and once I'm done with these three chunks, I have a pretty good idea of what my long-term strategy is going to be.
Yeah.
Uh, Anything before I move on to my last chunk?
I think we're good there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. The last chunk is less strategic and more tactical. I just think about what I want to open and what's going to matter and how my opening will affect that. So the big things that you want to do early on are thinning and junking, which have a relationship, right? Junking makes it harder for your opponent to thin. Thinning is really good for you. Uh, and you really want to think of what you want your deck to look like and really tailor your opening towards getting it there as quickly as possible. So if your thinner costs 5, then you sometimes want to just open so you can hit 5 a bunch. Or if the junker costs 5, you want to prioritize hitting 5. But if it doesn't, then just go straight for thinning while not killing your economy too much. And then maybe a little later on have your plan to hit 5.
Yeah. Something also to look at here is it's not just like that key card, but also um, whatever card you're looking at, right? If in my engine eventually I want to have a bunch of a 5 cost and a bunch of a 4 cost and a bunch of a 3 cost, I'm going to build it a little bit differently than if everything costs 5.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Um, and that sort of speaks to this a little bit. Like a tip that I like to do is I look at what I want to open and I get an idea, and then I try and think about optimizing that. So if I'm looking at a board and I'm thinking, well, I want to get some potions, some potion cost cards. So I'm probably going to open potion and then steward or whatever. But maybe I really want an armory in my life, and maybe it's okay if I armory and get the potion, and I'm happy that I have the armory. Maybe it's worth the risk. Or maybe instead of opening with my $4 village, I can open with a gainer that gains me the $4 villages, like Talisman or something. Now, gainers are a big part of this optimization. Usually when I'm optimizing, I'm looking at gainers in the opening. But sometimes, I'm looking at maybe an attack that I really want to prioritize. And so the best thing for me might not be as good as attacking my opponent, for example.
Yeah.
So just think about like what are the cards I'm not looking at? Can they possibly fit in, and can it optimize my opening? You know.
And I think something to mention here that goes along really well with the gainers is when you're trying to prioritize the just optimize the right order to get things right,
Hmm.
it's you want to look at is it how important is it um that I get a lot of these versus how important is that I get it as soon as I possibly can.
Hmm.
Um, so something like a junker or a trasher, you want to get it ASAP. So you defer other things maybe to get to 5 faster if it costs 5, right?
Yeah.
But if it's something like a lab, that's something that okay, I'm going to want to get a bunch. So I might do some other things to set up better to thin down first, say,
Hmm.
um, which will slow me down in getting the first ones maybe, but at the end, after several turns, I'll be ahead.
Yeah, for sure. And that kind of speaks to the last little tip that I wanted to make. Like a lot of times, when you're looking at the board, you can identify critical splits. Like my payload and my draw are both terminal, and it's important to do a lot. So the villages are going to restrict what I can do. Or I have all the villages I want, but the draw is only lab, and so the lab split is very critical. So if you can identify that and think about how much you want to prioritize winning that split, if just having the split is important, then you can take a detour to improve the quality of your deck and maybe aim for a double lab turn. but maybe you just want to spam them because, getting one lab helps you get more labs, and then just building up after that is better. You know.
Yeah, and I think in trying to figure out whether a split is important or not, like I mean, the first thing is obviously just if it's the only thing of that kind and you're going to need it. Like if it's the only village or if it's the only plus buy card and you need a bunch of that, okay, that's what signifies this might be important. But in terms of whether I really need to go after this hard from the start and possibly neglect how I would build the rest of my deck otherwise because I need to win the split versus, well, the split is important, but I can't neglect building the rest of my deck. Like, there's some
Yeah.
tension there.
Yeah.
And to help figure that out, one of the things I like to do is, okay, think about would I rather be in a position where I only have like 3 or 4 of these of this card? I'm gonna say village because that's just an example, but
Yeah.
it could be whatever other thing. If I only get 3 or 4 villages, but I've built my deck, however I have the rest of my deck built out, I have some draw cards and stuff to where I'm building my engine. Like, how good is my deck there against someone who took the other line and they have 6 or 7 villages, but basically nothing else because they were like the split is super important.
Yeah.
And so you have to think, is the rest of the board conducive to where if I have this deck that's running really well but can't get much bigger, am I going to be able to take this advantage of I have a better deck right now and be able to turn that into a win before the other person's advantage of I potentially can build something that's much bigger because I have more overall villages before that overcomes. And it's actually kind of paradoxical, but even in the opening when I'm trying to figure this out, something you have to think about is, okay, comes up a lot. To take advantage of it, you would need to do X. I would need to get a lot of draw cards and then a lot of like, I don't know, like if it's something like Woodcutter, that's not a very good payload, but or if it's something like Goons, it is. But the thing you have to think about is 3 pile endings actually,
Oh yeah.
right? Because if it's by the time that I'm building up enough to overcome having a worse deck to start with, if I need to get 7 of this card and 7 of that card to go along with my 7 villages or whatever, then the piles are going to run out too fast, and you know, so that in the end, yes, if the game went on indefinitely, the the split would be more important, but because they can block you by threatening piles, then you need to not neglect building your deck.
Yeah.
Versus sometimes if it's like bridges and you only need 5 or 6 or something, say, they can't realistically threaten piles enough, and you are going to be able to have this big explosive turn that you couldn't necessarily have with fewer villages. But it really depends a lot on the board, but you need to think, okay, in order to overcome this, I'm going to need to do X. If I do X, will that work? Like, assuming my opponent's not an idiot and they're trying to counteract me.
For sure. And I mean, I think you always assume you have a competent opponent. I don't think you ever assume that your opponent's going to misplay before the game starts. I mean, if it's the only way you can win, sure, but
I don't know, it's like bots sometimes. No, I still assume they're competent and it's just easy.
for sure. And I would also want to add, I think that kind of situation where you want to race the end of the game like that despite losing a critical split comes along more often when that critical split is a village and less often when that critical split is draw. But that's
Yeah,
that's
the
a
critical split being draw is kind of weird because it's usually you can't be like I'm going to race and get 7 smithies with no villages.
right. Yeah, that's a little strange. But if the draw is non-terminal or something,
Sure,
it can be
sure.
like that. I would think that. Oh, and also like that the skill to find that out and adjust accordingly to how much to prioritize this play. That's really hard to do.
Yeah,
Like there.
it's really subtle and it's really tricky and it's often not clear. I'm
Yeah,
not saying like feel bad if you don't figure it out. I'm saying these are the things you should be thinking about.
yeah, and there are really good players that have trouble with it. You know, I mean, I feel like I'm okay with it, but
There are also schmucks like me who have trouble with it.
I didn't say that.
I said it.
Of course you did. But I mean, and the last thing I wanted to say about the way I look at things before the game starts is this is really as strategically deep as I'm willing to get when the game starts. And I know there are a lot of things that I think you're gonna say, like that that you think about before the game begins. I know a lot of people say I'm aiming for a 3 pile on these 3 piles before the game starts, and like I don't do that.
I don't do that either.
Some people do, and
I mean, occasionally I will, like if it's like an Ironworks rush, right? And it's like Ironworks Gardens, and I'm gonna run out Ironworks Gardens, and if there's some other obvious third pile, like yeah, I might in that case it might be that my strategy is I want to 3 pile the game as fast as I possibly can, but that's very rare. Um, in general, it's well, I'll get to what I do in a second. I'll let you finish.
yeah, I'm about done. I think that a lot of the other decisions are better made in the moment when you have access to more knowledge. And I think the stuff that you have to that you're really going to benefit from doing before the game starts is pretty much on that list. And then just getting started, knowing more about what your opponent wants through their buys, and then knowing more about your draws and how much is really feasible, or like take advantage of a good draw, or well, I didn't get a good draw, so maybe I'll try something else. Like that's just, those decisions are better made before you've done a whole bunch of planning that will probably be changed because of something like that. So yeah,
Sure.
that's about all I got.
Okay. So now I'm going to talk about how I look at things, and I look at things a bit differently from Adam, although I think especially hearing him talk about it in depth like this, I don't think it's actually all that different in terms of the core fundamental concepts. I just think of it slightly in a different way, in different like terms.
Yeah.
So for me, there's kind of three big things to look for on a board is power, disruption, and speed or efficiency. Um,
Them are some
so
different buckets.
power is largely about like if I have an infinite amount of time on this board, what is the most ridiculous turn that I can put together? Right?
Okay.
So like I can play 8 bridges and buy all the provinces, right?
So good.
Or or but it also has to do with how many points can I possibly score, right?
Yeah.
So in some cases, to me, power is I get a lot of dukes and duchies, and that just scores a zillion points. Or I'm going to get huge vineyards, and then they're going to be 11 points each, right? That is something that's very powerful.
Yeah.
Um, disruption is usually about attacks. So if, but it's more about how much can I stop my opponent from being able to do what they want to do. So, King's Court and Saboteur is a very powerful element of disruption,
Oh
right?
yeah.
A very strong disruptive element.
Don't want to mess with that.
Ambassador is a huge disruption thing, right?
Hmm.
That if I just play ambassadors enough, my opponent isn't going to be able to do very much because their deck's going to be full of terrible cards. So that's a really powerful disruptive element. Uh, pins are disruption, like par excellence. Like my
Yeah.
whole game plan is I will stop you from being able to do anything at some point, and then I can win at leisure, right? And it doesn't matter if what I'm doing ends up being like really slow and awful because you can't do anything, right?
Yeah.
Um, but giving out junk cards is disruption, and it's important to note like how effective is this disruption actually going to be. So so disruption is a lot like what you're talking about, attack and defense. Um,
Right. But
and
you
the
said it.
power is a lot like you're talking about. What's the most whatever thing that you could do on the board that you were giggling at, that you weren't actually giggling at, but
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
never giggle.
I,
Um,
I, I feel I feel what you're talking about, but you said that disruption wasn't always about attacks. And like when I talk about attacks, like possession goes in there and it goes in there, right? They don't
sure,
say
sure.
attack on them, but
It's the same concept that you talk about. Based, there might be some edge case that would be slightly different, but it's almost exactly the same topic that you're talking about. It's not necessarily strictly quote unquote does it say attack or not. Like also some things that just aren't very disruptive that are it's an attack but it just like it doesn't matter that much like fortune teller but I'm going to be trashing everyone's going to be trashing all their green cards anyway.
yeah.
Like technically that's an attack but it doesn't really do anything, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Um so yeah, something like ill-gotten gains giving out junk cards, that's disruption without necessarily being an attack.
Okay,
Um,
good.
you know, Masquerade isn't really ever an attack, but King's Court Outpost Masquerade is a pin that is a very strong disruptive element, but I normally don't think of Masquerade as an attack. Um,
Yeah, to me
so
Masquerade is a pin card.
it can be having a very strong disruptive element in conjunction with a discard attack. Because if I can play Village Margrave, Village Masquerade, now instead of giving you a two-card hand, I've almost given you, or instead of giving you a three-card hand, it's almost like I'm giving you a two-card hand, right?
Yeah.
Are you following me?
Yes.
Right.
Got it.
So, but a disruptive element can often just overwhelm, um, quote unquote, the power one.
Mm-hmm.
Like on ambassador boards, usually like it doesn't really matter if at the end of the day I could build up some huge engine that buys 5 provinces in a turn because that's not going to matter because you'll never get there if the ambassador thing doesn't work out well for you. Like
Yeah.
if I ambassador you into oblivion, it doesn't matter what a powerful thing you could eventually do because it's going to take you 1,000 turns to get there, and the game will be over 30 times by then. Because
So
your
many
deck is
times.
just so bad.
Yeah.
Um, so disruption can often overpower, but there's ways to mitigate it down. Like I have Chapel, you can ambassador me a lot, or some decent tragedy, you can ambassador me a lot, but like my deck's not going to be that bad, and I have a powerful enough payload that it can do something. Um, but I think uh, my power roughly corresponds to what you're talking about in the second category, where
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about building things, but it's a little bit different because I consider like the points, like what is the end goal of being able to get, village, Margrave, King's Court, all this stuff. Like at the end of the day, what am I getting? And like I'm just getting a bunch of provinces, or okay, that can be very powerful, but if I can get enough cheap, other victory points that like even if you have all the provinces, I'm going to be fine anyway, then that's not really more powerful, right?
Yeah.
But in talking about this is where the third thing like starts to come in is speed. Like sometimes you can get to a very powerful, like the most powerful thing on the board is I'm going to draw a bunch of cards and then play 7 bridges and then buy all the provinces. Fine, that's very powerful. A lot of times it doesn't make sense to buy all those different things when just building a more normal engine with some decent stuff and some treasures and a few bridges maybe. Like I can buy 2 provinces 3 turns in a row before you ever get your mega turn off. And so that's, it's not as powerful maybe, but it's faster. So
Yeah.
it can be better. But speed often comes around. Um, that's where I consider big money because big money is usually a speed-based strategy. It's I'm going to get too many of the provinces or too much of the overall points that by the time that your engine is doing all its fine, fancy, powerful things, it's too late. I have too many
Okay.
points. You can't come back.
Yeah, I've never looked at it that way, but that actually does make a lot of sense.
Um, Speed also comes into play when you're talking about a strategy that um, looks to three pile, which you have to be careful about. Like you're talking about, I'm gonna three pile these three piles. It's very rare that can be your overall game plan. You usually need to pair that with something else. So, like maybe my favorite deck is an aggro pile deck, what I call an aggro pile deck,
You
where
like your aggro piles.
I'm trying to run out three piles. There was, the young witch, the kingdom I think from last time that was the young witch, and then I was in tunnel and I was bearing down on young witch's tunnels. Well, not the young witches, but the tunnels, the curses, and the duchies.
Yeah.
Um, those kinds of things. That was a speed-based deck. If Adam had enough time to get his engine off, uh, he was going to be able to outscore me eventually. Like he was going to be able to get all the provinces and eventually outscore me. But the way that worked was a combination of speed and disruption, right?
Yeah.
Disruption in that case wasn't my overall game plan, like it sometimes is with Ambassador or a pin, but it helped along my speed game plan of being able to empty piles and end the game. Um, the disruption gets me enough ahead to where I can end the game before you can go off with your huge turns. Um, and so those two things can combine very well to potentially look at emptying three piles. Now, in general, that doesn't work very well if there's just zero power. You need to have at least some amount of power. Like I was still getting a couple provinces and scoring a decent number of points in those games, right? Um,
Yes.
so it had some power. It wasn't as powerful overall, but it was powerful enough. And then I had the speed and disruption to be able to empty piles quickly. Um, Pure speed games don't come up very often. They do come up occasionally, but not very often. Those are, your quote unquote rushes, where I get a bunch of ironworks, I empty the ironworks, I empty another pile, I empty a third pile very fast, 10, 11, 12 turns, and I just empty piles super fast before you can go off and just end the game. But the tricky thing here is if you're counting on speed and you want to empty piles, you got to be able to do it by yourself.
Yeah.
And that is usually too hard to do. Um,
I mean, with no kingdom cards, it seems pretty tough to do. So,
well, with no
you're
kingdom
looking for
cards,
good
it's
support.
like impossible.
Yeah. We're gonna
But
empty the coppers and the silvers and the estates.
there are a few key cards that kind of point you that this might work out. Gainers, cheap gainers sometimes. Ironworks most notably because it is non-terminal, and so you can empty the Ironworks pile very fast, and then maybe go after some other piles. Um, so that's one thing. But you also need to have, usually with that even, right, you have the power of gardens as some points. Like if I'm just emptying three piles, sure, maybe I can empty three piles, but they can adjust and buy like one or two provinces and then I'm sunk because I'm not scoring anything, right?
Yeah.
So that's why Ironworks Gardens or Ironworks Silk Roads are powerful, is because it's very fast, but it also scores a reasonable number of points.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Something like Stonemason can empty piles very fast, and maybe you're scoring almost no points. And so that's something you want to be aware of going in. But usually, if I plan on going for just a straight up Stonemason, I'm just going to empty piles as fast as I can. Like that's going to lose to big money, right? Because it's going to get a province or two, and then like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
So you need to incorporate the speed aspect within some other strategy.
For sure.
It has to have some power. It has to have some other strategy, and it may turn out that you know because you end up in a mirror, particularly, that you end up focusing a lot on speed, and you need to make sure that you're positioned to be able to do that. Having the kind of pile control. Um, but it's something to keep in mind. And this is the last thing that I really want to talk about is the first thing I think about is overall this strategy. figure out what the overall strongest strategies are in terms of a combination of these three things, like the most powerful this, or the most, balancing power and disruption, and maybe a speed thing, but mostly power and disruption. And then you start thinking about, how do I implement that in particular? And then you can think, how do they match up against each other, right? So you, first of all, you identify the big ones, and then you figure out, okay, how do they match up against each other? And then when you want to actually go think about, what do I want to buy on turn one, you think about, okay, which of these things do I want to go for first? How flexible, like if I think it's really close, then I'm going to value flexibility more, right? Especially if there's a few different strategies and there's kind of a rock, paper, scissors thing going on,
Oh yeah.
then you really want to focus on flexibility a lot, which comes in a lot of different shapes depending on what the different strategies are. But you need to be able to move between one or the other so you don't get stuck playing rock when your opponent can easily play paper.
Paper's the best, man.
Because paper is just great. Like, I write on it all the time, and
Yeah. Super good.
Yeah, you want to have the flexibility to be able to shift. So sometimes that means what ends up happening is you play a strategy that's objectively less, quote unquote, less powerful or worse than you could have, but it's because you're not really playing rock. You're playing rock with an option to change into paper or scissors, and maybe it's a little bit less focused, but you have this very specific reason that if they would have done this, then I still had outs to change into playing scissors. And so you want to think about, again, I'm going to just repeat this one more time, is figuring out what the, powerful and disruptive strategies are, the premier strategies, then comparing how they do in the head-to-head, and then figuring out, how do I want to implement that? Do I want to thin a lot first? Do I need to go after a split? Do I need to get to my disruption the fastest? Or do I need to just, be able to build my economy more first? Like, what are the key cards? In what order do I need to get? Especially considering my opponent could be trying to run down a split, or trying to disrupt me, or trying to do this or that or the other. And then once you actually play the game, you need to have that adaptability of, my opponent looks like they're going for this. I want to make sure that I'm covered. If they're going for something that's speedy, I need to make sure that I'm not going to be too slow, A, but B, that I'm going to have a powerful enough, finishing option that I'll be able to overcome it.
Yeah.
That I really am going to have that much power. If they start to going for something really powerful, you need to have an out to, okay, my plan here was, if they were going for building up this much, I was going to try to empty the piles, right? I thought, that engine is more powerful than what I'm doing, except I don't think it can work because there's a counter to it. You need to be able to go to that counter. To go to that, for instance, you're playing a big engine that has a lot of buys and things. I want to play an aggro pile deck. Well, the aggro pile deck isn't the overall strategy. The strategy you're playing is basically some variant on big money. But big money is a lot weaker than the engine, but you have this disruptive element of, okay, you're going for this engine that's going to take too long. I'm going to 3-pile you out. But if you would go for a big money deck, or if you would go for, some other kind of do-nothing deck, or just some pure defense deck, right, that scores some points. Maybe you rush for points for, like, no apparent reason. You just start buying duchies on turn 5. Like, I can't really go for my aggro pile now because you have more points than me. So in that case, I'm going to just play more traditional big money and get enough provinces, right?
For sure. And I think that, 9 or 10 turns into the game, or several turns into the game, it's always healthy to ask yourself, like, reassess where you are, and
Even
like
before then, I find often turn 5, you've had 2 shuffles go through. What are they doing?
Sure.
How can that beat me? What is my weakest area that I need to shore up? Or if I can't shore it up, how do I make it not be important? right?
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a couple things. It's you're either taking a very extreme position because you think it's just better. Like you just think that I'm just going to go for the most extravagant and powerful thing because I think it's just better to do that, and I'm going to be able to outscore them in the long run, no matter what it is they're doing.
Yeah.
Fine,
So
sure,
like
that's good.
goons.
Right, Goons is a great example of that. Going for some big, mega turn on colonies is a good example of that, or something like that. Or Duchy Duke sometimes. Like, I'm going to head down, barrel down. I'm going to get all these duchies. Eventually, you're going to build some great engine, but I'm just going to have too many points, right? Because me getting these Duchy Duke points is just more powerful.
Yeah.
Which maybe you wouldn't look at that as more powerful because it's power in a very different way than an engine, right? But
Yeah.
so sometimes you do that, or sometimes you're going to be, I'm playing this Ironworks Gardens Rush. I'm just going to be faster than anything you can do. I'm just going to run out the piles, and there's nothing faster that you could do at all. Like, I'm going to be the fastest. Those things come up rarely. Usually you're somewhere in the middle. You're more often on the powerful side than on the other side, but you're usually somewhere in the middle. And you need to have plans for if they go for something super extravagant. Okay, in that case, I need to be able to, pre-game, I thought I could beat them by doing this, right? By going for this pile out or by getting enough points fast enough that they're not going to have enough time. You adjust your strategy. Or if they go for a rushy kind of thing, you know that, okay, I need to react to this by now I'm specifically not emptying piles. I'm making the game last a little bit longer and I'm building up to something that's going to have enough power that can overcome them. They're going to stall out and then I'm going to be able to province and not panicking too much. Like reacting to what they're doing, but that doesn't mean panicking, right?
For
I see a
sure.
lot of times people go for a build-up kind of deck, and then when they're playing against, say, a big money strategy and they're down 2 provinces or 3 provinces, they
No.
panic. They're like, oh no, I need
Pull
to
the
get
trigger.
provinces.
Yeah.
But that isn't the right reaction. The right reaction was, I knew that was possible to start with, and hopefully you did. Like, that's why the first step of identifying all the powerful potential things that you could do on the board is. I knew that was possible, and my plan was I thought I was going to be more powerful. I was going to be able to have, this big end game where I'm scoring way more points at the end, and I'm going to stick with that, or maybe I'm even going to double down on having these big, massive turns at the end. And I want to make sure that they can't end the game from under me too fast.
Yeah.
But that means I don't want to buy province now. I want to build more, right?
Yeah.
So that's my thing is identify the power of the disruption and potentially the speed. Identify all the powerful things. Combos come in there usually with one of those things. They're usually powerful, but sometimes very disruptive. Like a pin is kind of a disruptive combo. So identify those preeminent key few strategies, then see how they match up against each other. And then you figure out, what's the important thing to do to have, whether it's to have flexibility or to win a split or to have pile control or just to be fast or, whatever it is. And then figuring out, okay, what do I need to buy that's going to get me to this next step? And then during the game to reevaluate as it goes on. What are they doing? How do I need to go against that? What is my potential weakness? And then what is the way that I can most mitigate that? Do I, slide, if it's the only way I can lose is short, do I need to mitigate it by getting some points now so I don't lose short? Or do I mitigate it by, I need to make sure the game doesn't last a short amount of time? So having those things in mind before the game to be able to know what to watch for, but in terms of precise actual buys, usually don't plan more than, your first 2 turns almost for sure. But turns 3 and 4 usually have a pretty good idea, but then you really want to be reevaluating. I've gotten through 2 shuffles. What's my opponent doing? Do I need to adjust?
Yeah, yeah. I find that, you go a lot more in depth into thinking about later implications of the game in general than I do.
Yeah.
And it bites me so rarely that I shy away from doing it. It's really, I mean, you can certainly think a lot in depth at the start of the game, and sure, that's probably better than doing it, but in the middle of the game. But
Sure.
oh man, that's so
Well,
hard.
to be fair, it's not like I'm like really especially most of the time. Like if it's something where someone's brought up this kingdom that they think is really interesting, and what do you think? Like on Reddit's Kingdom of the Week, I will sometimes sit down and calculate out, okay, I would need to do this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then I'm going to
Yeah,
get these, and then I'm going to get these, and it's probably going to take me 17 to 18 turns to empty the provinces. Like,
yeah,
you can do that, and I will occasionally do that. I very rarely do. It's mostly being lazy, but sometimes it's really hard because there's a lot of different things going on, and you're going to have to adjust more.
oh yeah,
But you can do that in a lot of cases, and then see, okay, versus this other strategy of I'm going to do this and 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 this, and that's going to take 23 turns, which is way too long. So go with the first thing.
yeah,
Um, like you can sit down and analytic like math it out sometimes. I don't normally do that. More it's okay, there's this draw engine versus this money deck versus this kind of good stuff deck. The draw engine's going to have this problem, so I don't like it. Its thinning is not strong enough. That's going to take a long time. Big Money has this really good enabler, an embassy, so I think I'm going to go with that. But I need to watch out for if they're going for, you know, extra points off of monuments. I need to be able to end the game by emptying all provinces, so that's something to watch for. Like, that's really tends to be my thought process, and I often do it in like 5 or 10 seconds or less. Like, I think I usually spend less time than you. Um,
Well, I mean, talking out loud takes more time than doing it
sure,
silently, for sure.
sure. But but that's usually again because I'm usually kind of lazy and I just like I want to play, and I also because I've played 20,000 games or whatever, and I have a pretty good feel of here's how fast Big Money Embassy is, and here's the engines are all different, but they're not that different in a lot of cases. Like
Yeah,
you have this trasher, and I like you know a, because you have something that fills the thinner role, and you have something that fills the draw role, and you have something that fills the village role, and each component is different within those particular roles, but it's kind of an adding together thing, and the specific interactions usually don't matter all that much.
yeah. Before the game starts, yeah, I would agree.
But sometimes they do, and if you really want to play seriously, you should think about that and make sure they don't.
Yeah, yeah. I
Um,
feel you, bro.
okay, so you want to test this out on a few kingdoms, and then we go into our last one?
Yeah, sure, sure. Let's go, man.
Okay, so let me... Adam Horton. Is that your
Oh, I need to.
be online?
Yeah, I need to actually open my client.
That might help.
Got it. Accept. Oh
Okay.
boy, black market, just the best.
Yeah,
Gross.
Adam hates black market.
Oh, so bad. It's such a terrible thing. Oh, and Paige is in the black market. That's disgusting. Okay. Well, there's no attacks
Well,
other than
let's
black
read out the
market.
board for our audio only listeners.
Oh, that's probably smart. Okay.
So it's Fool's Gold, Moat, Raise, Squire, Black Market. We'll get to what's in the Black Market deck in a second. Apprentice, Mandarin, Mystic, Tribute. Oh, I missed
Remake.
Remake. Yeah, I missed Remake. So again, that's Fool's Gold, Moat, Raise, Squire, Black Market, Remake, Apprentice, Mandarin, Mystic, Tribute. Now, there are also two events on this board. Pilgrimage and Lost Arts. In the black market, there's Embargo, Smuggler's Treasure Map, Vineyard, Treasury, Oasis, Philosopher's Stone, Ill-Gotten Gains, Militia, Mining Village, Explorer, Island, Mine, Page, Journeyman, Noble Brigand, Band of Misfits, Cut Purse, Monument, Goons, Hunting Party, Lone, Grand Market, Herbalist, and Haunted Woods. Of course, page being in there means that the page upgrades are potentially available very, 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 very slowly. Yes, I'm not going to read the black market again because that's really long. You can hopefully rewind your podcast if that's necessary or
Oh,
watch
I
the video.
hate this board so much.
Yeah.
This is so
So
nasty. I
let's
feel
talk about
like
how we're breaking it down.
there are no attacks other than what's in the black market deck. And
Yep.
so, like, it wasn't really that bad, right? I didn't even see any
There's a
junkers in there.
militia and a noble brigand and a
There's no
cutpurse and
junkers.
a goons.
So, like, you get control
And
over what's in your deck.
embargo fits in the disruption kind of category as well,
Yeah,
even though
but
it's
the
not an
the
attack.
trashing's strong enough. You can have control over what's in your deck. You can get thin.
Sure, but I'm saying in general, it's something that, especially if it was on the main board, okay, I'm going to keep in mind that there's embargo, and if I really need to buy 8 of a card, then that could be problematic,
Sure.
particularly with this card, Fool's Gold, which often you want to get a lot of.
Okay. I feel you, bro. Um, the you have Village with Lost Arts and Squire, but the draw is pretty weak. Like you've got
Yeah, there's
Apprentice, but
there's
no
Moat
gainers
and
really.
Apprentice, but Apprentice there's you're gonna run out of fuel, and Moat turns into Lab.
Yeah, there's like a couple of villages and some little bit better draw in the black market deck, but really I'm looking at Page into Champion to make non-terminal moats as a really reliable source of draw, and that does not seem good. And that's a
That
big
takes
deal.
a long time because you don't know how quickly you'll be able to hit that out of the black market, and then you
Yeah,
have to go through your deck,
and then you have to.
get it
Oh,
up to
that seems so
champion, and
bad.
then you can start doing it. So that is something that's very powerful, but very slow from how I would analyze it.
Yeah, the discard attacks. I mean, that's pretty nasty. I actually think I want to play big money here, like remake Fool's Gold, and then if I see my opponent going for other crap, I'll probably like get an apprentice or something to
See,
speed up the end of the game.
so for my thing is I think there's kind of two real strategies here. One is to do some kind of heavy fool's gold money, like you're talking about. Um, the other thing that you can do is try to build a big engine, which is certainly more powerful potentially, particularly with the presence of goons in the black market. Haunted Woods is kind of disruptive, but not that bad. Um, there's some good things in the black market. And there is enough thinning that you might potentially be able to do that. So I would be narrowing down to, okay, I can go fool's gold, fool's gold, fool's gold, fool's gold, fool's gold, fool's gold, and with a few other things maybe at some moment. Not sure about remake. I think I would probably not get it. A moat is going to be obviously fine. Maybe I get a tribute depending on if my opponent is going for a lot of actions or not. Mystic's okay, of course. Mandarin can actually work pretty decently with Fool's Gold.
Yeah,
Um, so that's one thing, and based on my stylistic preferences, that's probably what I would kind of go for. But if I wanted to be really serious, I would then be thinking about, okay, this black market deck has actually a lot of good things in it. Mining Village, Militia,
I
Treasury,
I disagree. The black
Goons,
market deck doesn't look very
Monument,
good here.
Grand Market. The game will be disconnected in 1 minute due to inactivity if I don't make a move. Uh, and with Lost Arts to give me a potential engine, the trashing is really strong. I would seriously consider that. And I think because Goons can score you a few points a turn without emptying piles, because Monument can help that, um, I would think that that's not crazy. And I would have to actually sit and think a long time if I wanted to be really serious about what I think's better. I think that the money deck is probably still better, especially because it empties piles, and so you can apply a little bit of pile pressure as well. Because the engine will probably need to get like a lot of moats to be able to draw. Having said that, I would definitely be playing the money deck here because I like it a lot better, and I think it's a little bit stronger. And so then I would think, okay, given this, you know, my opponent could be going for an engine. If they do that, how am I going to need to adjust? And that's going to be mandarins are going to help me out if I have, two fool's
Two
golds and a
fool's gold,
copper.
yeah.
Then instead of buying a duchy, I'm going to play two fool's golds, buy a mandarin, put the fool's golds back. And it's going to help me. Mandarin is a really good card for helping you drain all the provinces.
Yeah, given Mandarin's here, Remake seems a little less good. Mandarin really does help you line up and
And
get
then do I want
provinces.
remake or not? And my gut is probably not that it's I would rather focus on getting the fool's gold split, especially if I think my opponent might mirror me. Like I think in the mirror especially, getting remake is worse. In the non-mirror, I might be more inclined to get a remake. So that's something that I'd be looking at a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, we're not actually going to play the game.
Oh,
We're going
I
to move on to
really
the
don't
next one.
want to play this game.
Well, I don't think we're
So
going to play
bad.
any of these because that'd take way too long.
But especially not that one.
Yeah, you do hate your. Okay, next board. Here we have Herbalist, Moat, Great Hall, Menagerie, Tunnel, Woodcutter, Familiar, Remodel, Knights with Sir Vander on top, and Expand. Once again, for our audio-only listeners, that's Herbalist, Moat, Great Hall, Menagerie, Tunnel, Woodcutter, Familiar, Remodel, Knights with Sir Vander on top, and Expand. Adam, you want to go first here?
Well, Familiar's a thing, and the only trashing is Remodel and Expand, so Familiar is a big stinking deal.
And that in particular is not thinning, right? It's trashing, but it's not thinning.
Yeah, I mean, you can expand into Great Halls and Menages, but oh man, that's so bad.
Yeah, that
Um,
that's incredibly slow.
Moat is defense, and it's actually really stinking good. Like, I'm gonna open Potion Moat for
Okay.
sure,
Yep.
and I'm probably gonna get a good honk of moats. Knights will probably also play. This game is gonna be long and ugly. First, the purples will happen. I'll probably get like an expand if I ever hit 7, because the game should be long enough where that's good, and it's night proof.
Okay.
But at some point, piles are gonna get low, and I'll just rush for green. Can you enable tunnel? Only with the discardy attack knight.
Oh, well, the any knight can discard a tunnel, right?
Oh, that's
If
true.
if your
Yeah.
opponent attacks you,
Yeah.
potentially. So that's a minor defense.
Yeah. Also, Menagerie is probably gonna be quite good
But they
here.
have to be trashing something else too.
True. But I guess you're not sad if they hit a tunnel, right? Because tunnel's
If
not
they
very
trash
good.
something else and then you get to gain a gold, but that's like it's really low percentage, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So when I look at this board, there is very little in the way of power, right? The most powerful thing you can do is like expand stuff, which is on an overall power level, like really low. The next most powerful thing you can do is like play golds and buy a province. Maybe play some 4 golds in a woodcutter and buy a province and a duchy. Like you
Whoa.
can't even double province really.
You can expand.
Yeah, yeah. With expand, you can have like gold, gold,
Yes.
gold, gold, expand, and get 2 provinces. But
So good.
but that's also way too slow. Like it's not that powerful, and it takes forever to set up, right? So that's kind of out. However, there's a lot of disruption, right? Familiar curses, and that's really good. The knights can trash all your stuff, um, which is can be very oppressive. So disruption's very high. Speed, there's no real way to take advantage of like, yeah, the curses are going to empty, but like the gainers aren't all that good and you're not gaining, decent things to be able to like end the game.
Yeah.
Now, you do have to keep in mind that the curses will probably run out and the knights are a pile that often runs out, although I'm a little less sure here. And so that could then lead to 3 pile endings. Um, you have to be the other weird thing about going for that kind of speedy, like aggro pile kind of deck is that knights trash those green cards, and then you're not behind, and then you're not ahead anymore, and they probably have a better deck still. So
Yeah.
that tends to counterindicate. I agree with you. Moat looks actually really good here. Particularly Moat Potion is mathematical percentage better to get to your 3 potion on time.
Yeah. I'm not gonna
Oh,
open Potion Herbalist
I'm
here.
not sure how many like if I really want to be getting like 5 moats, but I probably want a couple. And then I also don't know about knights. This is something that I'm going to want to see. How is the game playing out? Like it's going to be something on my mind, but how is the game playing out? How close is it to being able to end? Do I want to go for knights? I probably want at least some, but I don't know that I'm going to go take them all the way down. And then I'm going to need to be able to pivot into the end of the game and or either do that or just being able to get a lot of economy like golds. Um, but it's not going to be a great game. Like Menagerie, there's no real way to enable. Like the trash for benefit kind of can, but it's really slow and laborious and long and hard. It
Yeah.
might be an okay card to pick up one or two of, but it doesn't really like. The problem I have with Moat is it doesn't play well with anything else you want to do,
Okay, I guess.
except as an opener.
I mean,
Moat draws me Familiar's Dead. Moat draws me Knight's Dead.
but mode is not curse.
True, and like I probably want 2 to 3 of them early. I I assume that my coverage won't be perfect though. The curses will start to fly, and then at some point it's not worth trying to fight the uphill battle.
Okay. I mean, I agree. That'll
Anyway,
probably happen.
I also think Herbalist is something to watch out for with the potion cost cards, but I think Mode is just better here.
Yeah.
But if you get lucky, then Herbalist Potion getting Familiar into Familiar is probably the best thing you could hope for.
Okay.
But it's just too low a percentage play.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to one more before our...
Okay. Looks like we got Transmute, Seller, Ratcatcher, Bureaucrat, Feast, Marauder, Mining Village, City, Merchantship, Possession, and also Plan the event. Once
Yep.
again, we have Transmute, Seller, Ratcatcher, Bureaucrat, Feast, Marauder, Mining Village, City, Merchantship, Possession, and Plan.
I think this one's actually pretty interesting.
Oh yeah, this one looks pretty cool.
Okay, so the first thing that jumps out to me is there's Marauder, which is quite decent disruption with not great thinning. Ratcatcher is here, so that's not nothing. And Transmute is here, so that is nothing. But I guess you can turn the ruins into duchies.
Yay!
Eh. But okay, so Ratcatcher's a thing. Um, but so that's a pretty good disruption with not great trashing. Um, so that's something to watch for that tends to steer me away from big engine kinds of things. That further gets solidified by the only draw on the board being City.
City.
Oh, I guess Plan also potentially helps you trash
Yeah,
a
plans.
lot.
Okay.
But you would need to have some card that you want to buy a lot of, right?
Yeah.
And like you can buy a lot of mining villages, but there's not a great reason to.
Yeah, like I would maybe put plan on city and then like try and get lucky. That does not seem
Yeah,
very good though.
if you can get if you're going to be able to get to enough money to be able to hit 5 fairly reliably and still have a card you want to trash in your hand after having making 5, then that's fine.
Yeah, like
But
if the ruins are out, it's not crazy because you'll want to be buying cities anyway, so you could
yeah, so
see how you do
then
it.
this is the thing to think about is Marauder is going to be good because the trashing is not that efficient that maybe you want to do both. Maybe you ignore trashing. Probably you want to do both to some extent. Um, and so that's going to make the ruins run out, which is going to activate cities. So that's a definite consideration. Um, how much do you want to go for cities? Well, the issue with going like all in on getting like 10 cities is that's going to be pretty weak to possession potentially.
Yeah,
Potentially, but the thing you have to think about there is okay, but my opponent who isn't going for cities, how reliably are they going to be able to possess me? Is it going to be 50% really? Maybe. Probably not.
I'm kind of liking the idea of I really like. I mean, I'm probably gonna open Marauder Ratcatcher regardless of my opening.
Sure.
I'm probably gonna get multiple Ratcatchers, like 2 or 3,
Okay.
and empty the ruins and spam my opponent with ruins and try and keep on
Sure.
top of things, get a silver or two or something.
Okay.
And then like ruins are gonna empty. I'm gonna want to get cities, and then I want to aim for multi-possession turns.
Okay.
And I don't. Maybe I don't aim for multi-possession turns. It kind of depends on if my opponent builds a deck that's worth possessing.
So yeah, okay. So this is a good example of some of the things I think about. That is one way you could go. That is like a very powerful thing with a dose of disruption, right? From the way I would look at it, that's multi-possession is incredibly powerful.
Yeah. And I mean, city possession, I see it here, and I'm like, oh, I want to possess my opponent several
Right.
times in a turn.
Playing 8 cities and 3 possessions is like, even against an opponent's deck who isn't great, that's still a very powerful thing to do.
Sure.
I want to go a little more disruption and speed, I think. So I want to go Marauder, probably Ratcatcher. I probably want to get a second Marauder fairly fast. Um, and then I probably try to empty piles. Um, Feasts and duchies. Got to get a little money and might pick up a merchant ship. Um, but Marauder gives you spoils, which are okay in an engine, but not great. The money is fine against an opponent going possession. Um, then I'm perfectly okay with having this deck that can kind of buy duchies, even though it also means it can kind of buy cities. So that's not the greatest thing. And I'd have to think a lot about getting possession in that deck because if your deck can get a lot of can get a city every turn, say, then it can also get a duchy every turn. So that's okay. But my gut is that's probably a bit slow, and that I would probably really go for more of this disruptive Marauder um, and a rat catcher, and then try to go for maybe a bureaucrat into getting a lot of duchies. And then
Yeah.
if you're going for a lot of cities, I'm going to try to empty them out because after I or about the same time I'm getting the duchies, mostly because I don't think your turns are going to be that big that a couple turns of really supercharged cities are going to be good enough.
There's some decent payload. I mean, here's the thing. Like, we agree on the opening, and I am not committed to any one thing.
Sure.
It depends very much on where we
Yeah,
are when the
I
ruins went
definitely want
out.
to see about how clean, how dirty are the decks, how fast is the game going, how smooth is it going,
Yeah,
versus how congested is it.
and like I don't have to know that at the start of the game, so like
Right.
I'm rarely going to actually think about that.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's worth noting. Okay, cities are something I want to think about. Possession is something I want to think about.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's good enough payload here. Like if you can keep a ruin market around, that's not a crazy thing to do here. Possession acts like gains.
Hmm.
So if you can, if I possess you, I can empty cities relatively quickly, and then I have plus buy, and then like holy crap, spoils
Sure,
aren't bad anymore.
sure,
And seller keeps me viable. I have plus buy, and I can just load up on treasures and
sure.
bureaucrat and all this stuff. It's great.
Bureaucrat.
I'm sorry, bureaucrat.
Okay,
Excuse my French.
okay. So that's some example kingdoms. If you guys want to send us kingdoms, we're always looking for kingdoms for you guys to send us to use at the end. But if you want to send us some in the comments section on Reddit or YouTube or wherever, my blog, Twitter, anything,
Yeah,
um,
all the things.
then love to engage in that kind of discussion, like talk about what we think is important on any kingdoms you want to send, or if you want to say, think about using this for the end, we can do that too. Let's move on to the bottom loaf or the bottom half or whatever.
The heel,
I'd rather not have it be a heel. That's
the
less.
crown.
Crowns are better than heels, I think. Anyway, the end of our podcast,
Oh yeah. So we have this kingdom here. We
which
have
means, yeah,
Dominion.
one final kingdom that we're going to go in maybe a little more depth on.
Yeah. So we've got Prince, Witch, Bridge Troll, Bandit Camp, Baker, Transmogrify, Sea Hag, Steward, Guide, Chancellor, And then we have for events Pathfinding and Pilgrimage. Once more with feeling, Prince, Witch, Bridge Troll, Bandit Camp, Baker, Transmogrify, Sea Hag, Steward, Guide, Chancellor, with Pathfinding and Pilgrimage. So this board, Sea Hag and Witch are junkers, but you have Steward for defense, well, trashing. Uh,
Potentially Transmogrify also.
Yeah, Transmogrify works, but it does not really do much against the purples.
Turns them into coppers.
Great. That's super lame.
Hot.
Super lame. Anyway, so that's a thing. Steward's probably going to be really important for that. You have Village with Bandit Camp, you have Draw with Witch, Steward, and Pathfinding, and there is some good payload here with Bridge Troll. Prince is a decent card, but actually there's very few things that are very good to Prince. Like Prince of Steward is good, but the rest of them, Prince of Sea Hag is pretty lame. Prince of Chancellor is pretty
Prince
lame.
of Sea Hag is amazing. Oh my gosh.
And,
if you could get it on turn 1.
okay. I got you, bro. And
With
Prince
the
of Trans.
headband and the hair and the moon.
Yeah, pink hair, purple headband, moonlight, glistening, etc., etc. But Transmogrifying Guide, they don't work with Prince because they head off to the reserve mat, and it's no bueno. So I'm looking at this thing and I see, I mean, yes, there's Steward and there might be Witch, and you get thin and you have some flexibility. I'm probably gonna open with a Steward and then either a Witch or a Baker, and that kind of depends because there's this Bandit Camp Bridge Troll payload, but then there's also just Baker with Pathfinding, and you can end the game super fast, with a Transmogrify to accelerate it. There's not much of a way to catch up.
Yeah, so Transmogrify is a good thing to note on speed, that it can... And a lot of the trash for benefit cards also work like this.
Yeah.
You can just mill out cards to be able to end the game. And they give you a good amount of control in those kind of speed-intensive games also.
Mm-hmm. So if I had more experience with adventures cards, I would know if Bridge Troll with Bandit Camp is going to be a strong enough payload. It is kind of a nombo because you really just want to play a ton of Bridge Trolls, but the way you do that is by adding spoils to your deck, and the draw is pretty weak. Pathfinding on Steward can be good, but that's terminal. Pathfinding on Bandit Camp can be okay. It's not the best. Prince can serve as draw, which is probably pretty good. But man, Baker can be really fast. And with the pathfinding and coin tokens, you can get past the Bridge Troll attack, which doesn't stack once you clean up the purples. So I would probably, I'm really leaning towards the Baker here. In which case, I mean, I would still open with the Witch, but it would be tough for me.
Okay. Assuming I have a 3/4, I'm going to open Steward, and then I have to think, do I want a second Steward or a Silver or a Guide? And I'm kind of leaning to Guide.
Oh yeah, Guide's probably going to be great for whatever deck.
Guide seems really good. So I think I'd probably go Steward Guide. Like Adam, I think you want to thin down with Steward, right? And then
Sure.
probably add a Witch, because just a little bit of disruption that provides is kind of annoying because they still have to use their Stewards to trash. And particularly at a rate of 1 a turn, it can be kind of annoying. I wouldn't get a second Witch for sure. I tend to lean towards getting some Bandit Camps and at least a couple Bridge Trolls. Probably either 2 or 4. And then, depending on how many Bandit Camps, this is where I wouldn't really plan out exactly how I'm doing this at the start of the game, and I'd see how things develop. But
Yeah, for sure.
but probably I'd be looking to get 2 to 4 Bridge Trolls, some number of Bandit Camps, I'm not sure, 1 Witch, and then I'm not sure, maybe Pathfinding on Bandit Camp, maybe using my Bridge Troll to be able to Prince a 5, which would probably be Bandit Camp.
Yeah, I missed that interaction, the cost reduction and Prince. You could
Um,
print. Oh yeah, you can print all kinds of cool stuff
but
now.
I'm a little worried that that's going to be slow, and so I have to kind of see how fast is the game going. It might be that you want to go for some kind of Baker and then pathfinding on Baker thing. But also where you stick your tokens from something like pathfinding can be a little bit tricky in
Mm-hmm.
terms of,
Yeah, there's not like one thing that seems clearly great.
yeah, a pilgrimage is kind of interesting if you're going for the like Bandicamp Bridge Troll thing, because you could have a few different cards.
Oh yeah, for sure. That
But
seems like it might be better than not pilgrimage.
um, I'm a little bit skeptical that it's better than just because it's 2 turns to get 3 cards, whereas I could probably just buy them.
Yeah, you're really not pinched on gains at this point, so it might be still might be better than nothing.
I might use it like, well, twice to get the effect once, but I'm probably not using it like a lot. Um,
The more I think about it, I'm pretty skeptical of your guide opening. Um,
really?
yeah, I think I might. It's I don't know, man. I don't know.
I don't really have experience, so I don't know. It might be awful. Like it might be better to go Steward Silver than I don't think I really want 2 stewards on this board.
Yeah, it's double steward doesn't seem
The
super
reason
appealing.
behind Steward Guide is like I want to play the guide, and then the first hand I have that doesn't have the steward in it, I want to call it so I can get back to my steward faster and trash without having to get the second terminal. That's the idea.
Man, double steward, steward guide, steward baker, steward witch. Like I'm
Oh,
not
I don't
positive.
know why I'm not thinking about there being a Baker token, so I can't open 3/5. Yeah, that's probably better.
I'm. It's tough though. I I'm not convinced I know the best one out of all those.
Although I was gonna say Steward Witch, you do 2 terminals including drawers is a little bit.
Yeah, I don't like opening that way and spending my token, which is why I might tend towards Baker, but that's
Well, you could also like I would not be inclined to get Baker, but I might be inclined to get Bandit. I still might Steward Guide.
and you know what? I'm actually still toying with ignoring Witch.
Yeah,
I'm
I think
probably
I might
wrong.
Witch. I think it's just going to be too annoying to have to trash every other
But
turn.
playing the Witch is so annoying anyway to
Well,
do.
if you want to go with that Baker strategy, then I could see it a lot more than if you're going for this
Yeah.
bandit kind of thing.
Yeah, like I'm just not convinced
Just
that one
because it's
thing's
a
better here.
terminal and you don't really have the room for it in the Baker kind of strat.
Yeah, like I might get a Witch a little later, like picking up a Bandit Camp, a Bridge Troll in my Baker strategy. Like
So
that
like,
might be
well,
fine.
the thing is, I would think like if you're gonna get one bridge troll, you kind of want 2 just because of the duration nature.
I don't know. I mean, I would want it in the Baker deck to get a plus buy on each turn,
Okay,
which you only need one for.
I can see that. Hmm. Um, so you're thinking like Steward Baker into getting. I assume you're still getting some guides at some point, like
But yeah, absolutely. I'd get guide over silver
or
all day,
whatever. All day.
until I had 2 guides.
Okay. And you're only getting like 1 or maybe at the most 2 silvers ever
Yeah, I think
in
so.
that deck.
I mean, I'm really gonna prefer Baker, and I'm gonna have coin tokens. So yeah.
What about Transmogrify? Like, if do you get it? When do you get like this? This is a card that I'm still iffy on.
So it's very good in the Bridge Troll deck when you're going for a lot of Bridge Trolls. Um,
Yeah.
I think it's good for the
Like,
Baker deck if you want to run out the clock. So
okay.
you pick it up later. I don't want to open with it. I would want to pick it up mid game.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think we'll have a lot of fun playing this next week, but
Yeah,
I don't really have a huge amount of confidence because I haven't played with these adventurous cards very much.
for
So it'll
sure.
be interesting to see what all of you guys out there think about this.
Oh yeah. I can't wait, man.
Yeah. So without further ado, this has been Wandering Wonder,
I'm Adam. I'll miss you
and
guys.
we'll catch you next time where we'll make some more luck. Dun 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 dun